Okay, so, you've all been sending in some really interesting stuff, and there's this one thing that we really need to dive into.
Hmm.
It seems like there's this pretty big trend happening with like international research funding,
Yeah.
and especially from like these major U.S. agencies.
Right.
So we're gonna kind of unpack this.
Yeah, let's do it.
We're seeing what looks like some pretty substantial belt tightening, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
from places like the NIH, the NSF, USAI,
Yeah.
when it comes to supporting research
Hmm.
that's happening, outside the U.S.
Right outside the United States, yeah.
Exactly. And the sources that we've got today are really interesting.
Yeah.
They're not just like, news articles that are reporting on these cuts, but they're also
Hmm.
kind of starting to explore what this all means.
Yeah, the broader significance
That's
for sure.
So I think our mission here is pretty clear.
Yep.
We want to get to the core of, like how big are these changes
Yep.
really? What are the reasons that are being reported, and
Yeah,
what could this mean for the global scientific community?
absolutely. I think that's a really crucial set of questions to ask.
Yeah.
And I think what's so striking
Yeah.
as we start to go through these sources
Mm-hmm.
is that, it's not just, kind of like we're adjusting the margins a little bit or tweaking things.
Right.
This is like a really substantial shift in funding.
It's not subtle.
It's not subtle at all.
Yeah, and the numbers really do tell the story here.
Mm,
When you look at like direct grants from the NIH to researchers in other countries,
mhm.
I mean, the drop is pretty big.
Yeah.
Like in 2024 is around $52 million.
Right.
And then now in 2025, it's like plummeted to 28.6 million.
Wow.
So that's
huge.
almost half.
Yeah.
And it's affecting like institutions all over the world.
Yeah. All over the place.
We're seeing it at like all these different levels. So you've got,
Yeah.
a smaller grant,
Mm.
about $49,000
Yeah.
to York University in Toronto.
Right.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got like a much bigger grant,
Mm-hmm.
$2.5 million for the What's Health Consortium in South Africa.
Right.
Canadian and UK universities in total, they got $3.7 million and $2.3 million.
Okay.
This year in direct NIH grants.
Wow.
And then Australian universities,
Mm-hmm.
like especially the Group of 8, they saw a pretty big chunk
Right.
of direct NIH funding in 2024.
Okay.
So the University of Melbourne got over $9.3 million,
Wow.
and the University of Sydney got more than $4.5 million.
Yeah. So it's
Uh,
a real
So it's
a real mix, but all substantial amounts.
yeah, it's a pretty clear picture of like a really broad impact.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, direct funding is only one way that this is happening.
Right.
You also have the subgrant model,
Mhm.
which is, where a U.S.-based institution gets like the main grant,
Right.
and then they collaborate with international partners.
Right. So they're kind of like the middleman almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can see how cuts there would have,
Mhm.
kind of a ripple effect.
Exactly. And we've got some examples of that.
Yeah.
Like the USAID Partnership for Higher Education Reform in Vietnam,
Right.
which is anchored at Indiana University,
Mm-hmm.
and the USAID supported early grade education thing in Uzbekistan
Yeah.
through Syracuse University.
Mhm.
So these are often like long-term,
Yeah, for sure.
substantial projects
Yeah.
that rely on this, flow of funds.
Yeah.
So when that funding gets reduced or like priorities shift,
Yeah.
the consequences are felt by all the partners.
Yeah, it's not just the U.S. institution that's affected. It's
Exactly.
the whole network.
Yeah.
And the sources that you've shared,
Yeah.
they really like bring this down to the level of specific institutions and countries.
Right.
So like take the University of Cape Town. They have a remarkable 155 projects funded by U.S. federal agencies.
Wow.
And the NIH is like a major supporter,
Yeah.
involved in over 140 of those.
Wow.
So we're talking about like $150 million
Oh.
over the life of these awards.
Mhm.
And a big chunk of that, like 66 million,
Yeah.
is still allocated for 2025.
Right.
So any kind of disruption to that level of funding is
Yeah.
going to cause some serious challenges.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of money and a lot of projects to suddenly have to like figure out a new plan for.
Yeah.
And then it's not just in South Africa either.
Mm-hmm.
The situation in Pakistan seems really bad.
Right.
There's reports of like $845 million in grants being canceled,
Wow.
which is just a staggering number.
Yeah, that's a huge amount.
And what's really striking is how like
Mhm.
USAID cuts have basically stopped
Yeah.
the merit and needs-based scholarship program, which
Mhm.
has been around for for over 2 decades.
Right.
And has helped like so many Pakistani students.
Yeah, and especially with a focus on women's education, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
they put a big emphasis on that.
Hmm.
And now it's like, in limbo.
Yeah.
And that's like a direct impact on, educational opportunities.
Right.
And long-term development for a whole country.
For a whole generation of students.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And the impact in Colombia is also worrying, especially when you think about, the context of their efforts towards peace.
Right. They're still working through that whole process.
Yeah. And the sources highlight how,
Yeah.
funding cuts have already ended or are like putting at risk
Right.
programs that were specifically designed to support, civil reconstruction.
Right. To kind of rebuild.
Yeah. After years of conflict.
Right.
So one example is the UNAL Fulbright Seedbed program at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia.
Right.
And that's directly affecting opportunities for Afro-Colombian, racial, and indigenous students.
Right. So already marginalized groups
Exactly.
are being further marginalized.
Yeah. And then there's the potential cancellation of the Colombia USA WEF Nexus Alliance.
Right.
Which is stemming from cuts at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And that's a threat to like really important work on sustainable development that involves a bunch of Colombian universities.
Yeah. So it's not just one institution, it's a whole network.
It's a whole network, and it really just underlines how, all these global challenges are connected.
For sure.
And how important collaborative research is, for addressing them.
Absolutely. And I think, beyond these kind of like large scale impacts, we're also seeing more immediate consequences for specific areas of research.
Right.
So projects focused on, tropical diseases or regenerative medicine, they're particularly vulnerable because they often need, consistent funding to maintain resources.
Cell cultures and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Cell cultures, experimental models. And as one researcher put it, like a sudden stop work order can basically just halt years of progress.
Yeah, it's like you're driving down the road and all of a sudden there's like a brick wall in front of you.
Exactly, and you just have to slam on the brakes.
Yeah, and I think this naturally leads us to, wonder about the reasons for these shifts and what it means for the scientific community more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some pretty big concerns. Yeah. And I think the sources point to, a potential chilling effect on like open scientific inquiry.
Right.
There's this growing sense of, hesitancy among researchers to speak freely.
Right.
And it seems like it's because they're worried about losing funding.
Yeah. And that anonymous quote from the Canadian biologist is really telling. The situation could be dire for many.
Yeah. That's a pretty stark warning.
Yeah. And the fact that, we've got a researcher studying neonatal brain injuries. And they're talking to CBC Radio, but they insist on staying anonymous.
Right.
And then there's another one working on global health disparities, talking to the ABC.
Right.
And they also want to stay anonymous.
Yeah, because they're afraid of what might happen.
Exactly. They're afraid of reprisal.
Yeah.
I mean, that says a lot about the current climate and the pressure that people are feeling.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty significant indicator of, the sensitivity surrounding this issue.
Yeah. And then there's this questionnaire that was sent to Australian researchers.
Yeah.
And it really adds another layer to all of this.
Yeah.
They're asking these questions about alignment with U.S. government interests. And the specific questions are really interesting.
Yeah.
Like things about, recognizing only two genders.
Right.
Or where their funding from China comes from, or whether they include like DEI or climate and environmental justice elements in their research.
Yeah, so it's all very specific.
It's all very specific.
I think I kind of pointed.
Yeah, it really suggests that there's this specific set of priorities that might be influencing funding decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Dr. Nicholas Fisk said that researchers are a bit scared of poking the bear.
Yeah.
Which seems to connect this questionnaire to the grant cuts.
Yeah, it seems like there's a direct line there.
Yeah, it's implying that like, you need to agree with certain viewpoints if you want to get funding.
Yeah. You have to play ball.
And then there's Vincent Poitout.
Right.
Who's worried about the impact on research focused on, like underprivileged populations, minorities, LGBTQ plus rights.
You have this more vulnerable groups.
Exactly. And he argues that these cuts aren't just about reallocating resources. It's like a big setback to societal progress.
To all the progress that's been made.
Exactly. And it raises this question about, are research agendas being skewed based on, funding priorities?
Right. Are we only going to be studying what certain people want us to study?
And then there's the case of Dr. Julie Bruneau and her NIH-funded research on medical care for people who inject drugs.
Right, a very important area of research.
Yeah, and her study was stopped.
Right.
Even though they'd already collected the data.
Yeah, but hadn't fully analyzed it.
Right.
So it's just sitting there.
Which raises some big questions.
Yeah, like why stop it now?
Right, and it's not clear whether this was because of like broader NIH cuts or if it was something specific to Columbia University.
Right, was it a decision made at the university level?
But ultimately, like, important research has been stopped.
Yeah, before it could really bear fruit.
And it's not just about, like, the individual research projects either.
Yeah, that's right.
Madeline Durand brings up, some really important ethical considerations about stopping clinical trials early.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about, like, the money that's been lost.
Right.
It could also put participants at risk.
Exactly.
And it might mean that they don't even get the potential benefit.
Yeah, they signed up for a certain thing, and now that's changed.
And that could really undermine, the whole idea of informed consent.
Exactly, the whole foundation of ethical research.
Right, because if a trial is stopped too early, before they've got enough data, it's like all the risks that the participants took were for nothing.
Yeah, and they may have experienced side effects. Or other downsides.
And they don't get any of the benefit.
And we don't get the knowledge.
Exactly.
What the trial was supposed to produce.
And Durand points out that, they got ethical approval for the trial.
Right.
Based on it being completed.
Yeah, they were promised a certain thing.
And now it's like they're changing the rules in the middle of the game.
Exactly.
And this also affects the next generation of researchers.
That's right. The up-and-coming scientists. And, the experience of Gordon Petty, who's a postdoc, really shows the uncertainty that they're facing.
Yeah.
So travel grants are frozen. They're having trouble getting access to equipment like MRI.
Right.
And there's just this overarching anxiety about getting funding in the future.
Yeah.
It's a really unstable environment.
It's like they're trying to build a career.
Yeah.
On like a foundation of sand.
Exactly.
And so it's no surprise that they're worried about, whether they can even have a career in science.
Right. Is this even a viable path anymore?
And it seems like there's a real risk of a brain drain.
Yeah. That's a big concern.
If these young researchers don't see a future for themselves in science.
Yeah.
They're going to go do something else.
Right. They're going to go where the opportunities are.
And that could have like really big long-term consequences.
Yeah.
For innovation and progress in general.
Yeah. I mean, who's going to make the next big discovery?
Right.
If all the young scientists are leaving the field.
And then Robert Quinn's perspective is really interesting.
Yeah.
He talks about these actions as like the U.S. Voluntarily unwinding its soft power.
Right.
Which I thought was such a...
Yeah, it's a really powerful way to put it.
Yeah, because for so long, U.S. funding has been this major force in shaping the global research agenda.
I've been a huge influence.
And this shift in approach could have really big implications for the U.S.'s influence.
Right. Will other countries step in to fill the void?
Right. And Madeline Durand's point about self-censorship is really worrying.
Yeah.
She makes this comparison between this kind of, self-imposed silence and what can happen in less open societies.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, because when scientists feel like they have to tailor their research questions.
Yeah.
Or even like the language that they use.
Right.
To fit with the priorities of whoever's giving them money.
Right.
It undermines the whole point of science.
Exactly. It's not real inquiry anymore. It's just following the dictates of the funders.
And she says that relying so heavily on a single funder, like the NIH, is a bad bet for humanity.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, it's a bold statement, but I think it's true.
Yeah. Because it shows how vulnerable the global research ecosystem is.
Right.
When you've got one big player.
Right, and they change their mind.
And then when we look at specific research areas, the impact is really broad.
Yeah.
We could see setbacks in neonatal brain injuries, in addressing global health disparities, in supporting the peace process in Colombia, in tackling climate change, biodiversity loss, public health initiatives.
Yeah, all these really important areas.
And even fundamental research, like Vincent Poidout's work on diabetes, could be affected.
Yeah.
And as Madeline Duran pointed out, research on HIV, by its very nature, involves working with underserved populations and considering issues of like gender identity and equity.
Right.
So it's really vulnerable.
Yeah, it ticks all those boxes.
In this new funding landscape.
Yeah.
And the specific examples that we've talked about really show how serious this is.
Yeah.
Like scholarships in Pakistan being suspended.
Right.
Rural development centers and student internships in Colombia being threatened.
Yeah.
The possibility that basic research on diabetes in Canada just won't be able to continue.
Yeah. Those are real consequences.
Those are real consequences for real people.
Yeah, for individuals and for communities.
So it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. These are people's lives.
So to sum all of this up, we're seeing this, really big decrease in U.S. funding for international research. And it's affecting all sorts of different scientific fields and institutions.
Yeah, all over the world.
All over the world. And it seems like there's, a link between these cuts and specific ideological priorities.
Right.
Which is raising concerns about self-censorship and whether scientists feel like they can, freely share their ideas.
Yeah. Are we going to stifle innovation?
And the consequences seem like they're going to be pretty far-reaching.
Yeah.
It's going to affect ongoing research, the careers of young scientists.
Right.
And it could slow down progress on some of the biggest challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, the challenges that affect all of us.
Exactly. And so this leads to a really important question for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Thinking about how interconnected global research is and how much we rely on these international funding mechanisms.
Right.
What do you think the long-term implications of this are?
Yeah.
For scientific progress itself and for our ability to actually address these global challenges.
Right.
Because it's not just about the money.
Exactly.
It's about, how this is going to reshape the whole global research landscape.
And what that means for the future of science.
And what that means for the future of discovery and innovation.
That's right.
So it's something to really think about.
Yeah. It's a big question with no easy answers.
And we hope you'll keep sending in your thoughts and your sources.
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
Because this is a conversation that we all need to be having.
Absolutely.
So until next time.
Stay curious.
Keep diving deep.